As non-black writers began to represent the world more as it is than as their personal circles are, black women began appearing in their stories in roles beyond those of servants, slaves, or stereotypes about African women. This doesn't mean that black women's roles in these non-black stories weren't stereotypical, mind you. They just adapted to different times. Stock characters like the black best friend, the serious black government leader, and the competent black nurse or doctor became very common. Now, none of these roles are problematic in a vacuum. Friendship, leadership, and compassion are all admirable traits. But when used the way that they often are, these archetypes reinforce prejudices. Black best friends can often be minimized, serving as merely an extension of the non-black protagonist. Black government leaders are sometimes portrayed as obstacles non-black righteous individuals must disobey to bring about good, or overly restrictive and aggressive. Black nurses and doctors are usually, thankfully, portrayed as important, as all nurses and doctors are, but if not given a character beyond being a nurse, these parts are sometimes, again not always, but sometimes, reminiscent of antebellum caretakers. These stock characters and their potentially problematic nature have been discussed at length, and I feel we're getting close to reaching a point where non-black writers are, well, perhaps not ceasing in this behavior, at least cognizant of how it can be harmful to only portray black women as only ever supportive or only ever angry, rather than as nuanced, complex individuals as they would treat a woman of any other race. But one relatively recent stock character, due to being less common in the past, has been comparatively uncriticized. Have you ever noticed just how often a black woman is introduced as a love interest for one of the characters of a work, only for that character to ultimately fall in love with a non-black woman that can give him something that she can't? Need some examples? Okay. Maybe the black woman is unceremoniously killed off, like Katya Mbwele from the Star Wars comics or Maid Marian in Once Upon a Time. Maybe she's too jealous of her boyfriend's platonic relationship with his white friend, like Karen Filippelli from The Office, Carly from The Good Doctor, or Rose in Miranda. Sometimes the black woman can't or won't give her boyfriend what he wants, like Kylie in Scrubs or Zoe Baker from This Is Us, while they'll easily get that from a relationship with a white woman. Famously, black women may be portrayed as too independent to be tied down by a man, like Sana Starros in the Disney Star Wars comics, or Kelly in Star vs. the Forces of Evil, even though audiences and even the writers of those works would never say being in a relationship ties down a non-black woman. Characters like both Simone and Alessandra in The Good Place are just portrayed as unable to understand their man as well as the lead white woman can. If they're lucky, stepping stone black girlfriends still end up with somebody, even if it's a minor or unseen character, like Charlie Wheeler in Friends or Angela Moore in Boy/Girl Meets World, respectively. If they're unlucky, they'll kill themselves since they can't be with their man, like Lieutenant Duala in BSG and Bertha Mason in Jane Eyre. Sometimes writers seem to just forget about black female characters like Layla Taylor from Marvel's Captain America and Falcon comics or Carly Diggle from Arrow. Sometimes the characters can't live with a man that puts themselves in danger, like both the Luke Cage comic and Daredevil TV show versions of Claire Temple. Characters like Tamara from Once Upon a Time, Rosie Carver from Live and Let Die, and Jezebel Jet from the Batman comics are revealed to have been evil all along, using their love interests for personal gain. And honestly, I could keep going. Nia Jones from Fear Itself, Valerie and Danny Phantom, Misty Knight in Iron Fist comics, Michelle Hunter in iZombie, Tamara Fox in Red Robin, Khadija in The Big Sick. And those are just examples from media that I myself have personally seen. Well, plus Friends, I couldn't make it through one episode of that show, but a family member suggested I include the relationship. Never mind, it's not important. The point is, I'm sure there are even more examples. In doing my research for this video, I read Yomi Adagoke's The Rise and Rise of the Disposable Black Girlfriend, which is a fantastic article that I've linked below. Examples I didn't know about included Karen in You, Sarah in Master of None, and Heather in Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. And that's not even getting into all of the teased possible relationships. The relationships where the non-black partner never moves on after the relationship ends, or scenarios where it's a black lesbian that dates other black women before eventually ending up with a non-black woman. The latter two can be done in much better ways and carry much less baggage, and don't actually imply anything about black women, and the former is admittedly subjective on whether or not you read the chemistry. This trend has gotten so bad that if a black woman arrives on a show and starts to show romantic interest in a character, I'm worried for that character's lifespan. Case in point, when Connie first showed up on The Walking Dead and had palpable flirtations with Daryl, even in front of Carol, the white woman many fans wish Daryl would be with, I was worried that they would get rid of her. As of now, she was buried alive and carried off by a horde of zombies. But then again, given that this is a universe where the same character can be struck by lightning, shot in the head, burned alive, drowned in a collapsing dam, all within the span of about a month, and still come out just fine, I'm going to hold on hope. But before anybody comes to the comments to list counterexamples where a black woman is actually the love interest and not a momentary fling, the pairing will often not be welcomed by the fandom. Well, rather, the black woman, be it the character and or the actress, will not be welcomed by the fandom. Kelly and Alex on Supergirl, despite being way healthier and more interesting than either shipping Alex with her manipulative ex or her adopted sister, is less popular among fanfiction writers. Candace Patton, the actress that plays Iris West on The Flash, has faced incalculable amounts of misogynoir, which, for those who are unaware, is the intersection of anti-blackness and misogyny that black women face, from vocal fans of Barry Allen's previous white love interests. Look at how Die Another Day was branded a bad James Bond movie, despite really mediocre entries in the franchise receiving unreasonable aplomb. Also consider that when Maggie and Patty left Supergirl and Flash respectively, there were still plenty of white women left on the show, whereas often when a black woman leaves a show, there are no black women remaining as representation, at least for a while. So why does this happen? Adagoke's article draws a comparison between the black girlfriends like Simone and Charlie to the black women that served in subservient roles in the past, be it the black best friend or the sagacious maid. To quote, "Black women in film and TV must be hired in another capacity than the help," end quote. When these two characters enter their relationship, the non-black partner might not be ready to settle down and find real love, but their black partner helps them get there. This can easily lead, just like the role of the black therapist, to black female characters being not characters, but rather plot points. Obviously, that's not the case for every example I listed, but it certainly is for some of them. I think there are also some other problems with this trope. Well, problem sort of undersells it. There are more reasons that this trope is misogynoir. For starters, it portrays black women as desirable, but less desirable than non-black women, to those attracted to women at least. Though it's rare, nowadays at least, to see writers outright say that they find non-black women more attractive than black women, there's room left for that inference to be drawn about the writer by the audience. Regularly portraying black women as less desirable can negatively impact black women in the audience's self-esteem. We know that that is the case when it comes to advertising, and we know that that is the case when it comes to explicit colorism in both music and on social media. So, presumably, when the same is implied rather than stated, there is at least reason to be concerned. Secondly, as there is correlation, at least in fiction, between whom you love and with whom you end up, this trope is reminiscent of a much older, much more obviously sinister trope. You see, this binary sets up the possible inference that a physical relationship with a black woman may be fun or even beneficial, but it's not the start of a great romantic love story. By relegating black women to this role, modern writers can continue to contribute to the stereotype of black women being hypersexual. Clive can have casual sex with Michelle, but if he wants to start a family, it'll be with his white ex-girlfriend. Matt might have sensual makeout sessions with Claire days after meeting her, but he has to keep that a secret, unlike his relationship with Karen, where they can go on dates in public. Bruce and Jezebel may be physically attracted to one another, but she's just using him to get what she wants, unlike Selena, who truly loves him. This is, thankfully, becoming much less common in most forms of media, although music videos still portray black women in hypersexualized, agency-absent roles more than any other race of women. Again, I will link some stuff to this below. To get into the history of black women being portrayed as more sexually promiscuous than their non-black peers would be enough to fill a video of its own. But suffice to say, the Jezebel stereotype, which is the stereotype of black women being seductive, manipulative, hypersexual individuals, has existed for a long time. Now, if you're new to feminist theory, you might think that the stereotype of black women as non-desirable and black women as hypersexual are at odds with each other. They actually aren't, as they are opposite ends of a spectrum. See, Kylie from Scrubs doesn't want to have sex with JD at an early stage in their relationship, so he values her less than the white women he sleeps with without much trouble. On the other end of the spectrum, you have Rosie Carver in Live and Let Die, who sleeps with Bond almost immediately, as a sign that she's untrustworthy, unlike the virginal solitaire, who refrains from indulging herself, at least at first. Both of these extremes are hopefully obviously sexist, and there's a term that has been used for it, but it uses a word that I'm not comfortable using, and it was coined by Sigmund Freud, who was definitely sexist, so I'm going to just not say it. But as they permit a man to act however he wishes, but expect women to fit into a balance of sexuality and chastity, there is a definitive underlying misogyny. However, when this complex is superimposed onto a spectrum where women of color are on the outsides, and usually black women at the extremes, and white women are in the middle, it becomes pretty obviously racist as well. Let's examine a full spectrum by looking at a character who has had a lot of love interests over the years, Luke Cage. On one end, you have Reva Connors and Claire Temple. Reva was a kind, innocent woman that Luke felt compelled to become a better person for, but she's murdered by a jealous criminal before she and Luke can get serious. Claire does get semi-serious with Luke, but as she's a respectable doctor, intelligent and empathic, she's not willing to live with or spend the rest of her life with a man that doesn't value their safety enough. She's heroic, kind and gentle, but ultimately a stepping stone for Luke. On the other end of the spectrum, you have Harmony Young and Dixie. Harmony Young is framed as the exact opposite of Claire Temple. She is a socialite/model. If you remember, we've discussed on this channel before how models are often portrayed as vapid or untalented, and that is somewhat the case here. Harmony is not so much concerned for Luke's safety, but bored by his lack of attention paid, or, if he does pay attention, she's annoyed by it. She's also explicitly stated to not have the brains or the class that Claire have, meaning that the comics themselves recognize this spectrum. Worse, she's drawn noticeably different than Claire in terms of framing. Claire wore conservative, neutral clothes, while Harmony wore skin-tight, revealing clothes, complete with defined curves. The smart, classy, kind woman is chaste and modest. The less intelligent, shallow, selfish woman is less so. Harmony breaks up with Luke, and she later dies to motivate him. Dixie, a Korean immigrant, is from the Cage Max series, so no surprises there that she's largely used in an exploitative way, with one of the covers primarily being composed of her naked back while she's having intercourse with Luke. Her body and the idea of her having sex was used to sell issues of a comic book. She never makes an appearance outside of this miniseries either. Then, in the middle of the spectrum, there's Jessica Jones. Jessica manages to thread the needle of emotionally loving Luke, but also sexually loving Luke. She cares about him and wants him to succeed and be safe, but unlike Claire, she happily allows him to continue as a hero, even adjusting her heroics to match his. She's sexually attracted to Luke, flirts with him, and physically arouses him, but unlike Harmony, she shows interest in Luke's personal life, and they get married and raise their daughter together. Obviously, as I've made clear in the past, it's not inherently wrong to have a black man and a white woman in love. However, when the black man has been intimate with 3 black women and an East Asian woman, and the ways that they are not able to satisfy him are met by the white woman, well, if this was an isolated incident, it'd be suspect. Since it's a trend, it's racist. Now we come to the part of the video where I suggest what actions creators should take to avoid this pattern. I'm clearly not saying that white women or other non-black women aren't allowed to be romantic leads, but when you followed the tropes listed, you've gone well beyond that. Still, I'd wager most of the writers of the art listed would never say that they intentionally fell into this trap. Rather, they just wanted to include black women in their art, and this so happened to be how it turned out. So, how can they avoid doing this, over and over again? Here are a few easy practices to help minimize your chances. 1. Don't set up romantic false leads in general. The idea that someone needs to burn through a love interest before they find the right one is ridiculous, so you don't need to rely on the age-old tropes of one person saying they want to be just friends but becoming jealous when they see them with somebody else. Maybe you can find a way to make it fresh, but don't default on that. 2. Don't write off black women when they fulfilled their narrative purpose. Very few of the examples I mentioned today remain in the story after their breakup. Sometimes they're killed, sometimes they're moved away, but very rarely are they kept around. To avoid that, don't see them as means to an end. Write them as actual characters, which leads directly into number 3. Write the romances with the mindset of how all individuals involved would feel. In a love triangle in which one outcome is telegraphed, we're usually supposed to care about 2 of the 3 members. As a writer, if you want to avoid disrespecting a character, envision how they would feel after what you write occurs in their world. And lastly, 4. Write black women as main characters, complete with their own romantic arcs, and not simply as side characters. Now, you may have seen some people say that you shouldn't write black women if you're not a black woman from their point of view. And I would say, yeah, probably not. But this doesn't mean that they have to be a point of view character. Rather, give the same attention to detail that you give your non-black characters to the black women in your story. And if you honestly reflect on the implications of your writing, you'll be much better off in the long run. As more works have black women, non-black writers will develop new stereotypes that often have their roots in misogynoir of the past. What we can do is actively work against that, not just assume that we won't do it ourselves, as well as boosting the writings of black women. Don't let your self-identification as a progressive cloud you from the implications your art entails, and call this trend out when you see it. It's time for us to do better.